In the harsh winter of the American West, a lone hunter finds a barely breathing woman lying in the snow. A bride is sent to a man, but abandoned before reaching her own roof. And Elias Ward, who only wants to live in peace with his old dog and his unspoken memories. In that moment, he was faced with a seemingly simple choice that turned out to be heartbreaking: save a stranger or walk away as if it never happened. If it were you, amidst the bitter cold and years of loneliness, what would you do when you saw a person trying to hold on to the last bit of warmth? Would you dare to open your heart one more time? Today's story will take you back to the Old West, where silence can save people and can also make people lose themselves. We invite you to start this journey. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to accompany the humane stories. The wind had a way of speaking across the high plains, a long, low whistle that slid between the pines and scraped along the frozen ground like an old violin bow against a tired string. Elias Ward had heard that sound for more than half his life. Some nights he thought it was the voice of the land itself, reminding him he wasn't nearly as alone as he felt. Other nights, it reminded him that the world was too wide for any man to fill the empty spaces it carved inside him. That afternoon, the wind howled across 10 miles of open country, throwing loose snow into the air like pale ash. Elias pressed forward anyway, boots sinking 6 inches deep with every measured step. His shotgun rested over his shoulder, and Boone, his grizzled hound with the torn ear and the stubborn limp, trotted ahead, nose low to the ground. It was the kind of day when a man kept his coat collar turned high, kept his thoughts tucked even higher, and prayed the weather wouldn't turn from unkind to deadly. They were circling back toward the cabin, a weathered structure framed from thick timbers and built by Elias's own hands 23 years earlier. He was thinking of the pot of beans he'd left soaking that morning. He was thinking of the stack of firewood that still needed splitting. He was not thinking of finding anyone out here, not in this weather, not this far from Copper Ridge, and never lying half buried in snow. But Boone stopped, just froze. His body stiffened, tail straight, nose pointed toward a shallow dip in the land where the wind had carved a hollow. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Elias felt his own spine tighten. Boone didn't growl at nothing. "Easy, boy," Elias murmured. But the old hound had already moved forward, shoving his muzzle into a drift and kicking up a spray of powder. Elias reached him in 3 long strides. What he saw stopped him cold. A human hand, blue-white, unmoving, fingers curled inward as though clinging to something the cold had stolen away. Elias dropped to one knee, brushing snow aside with both hands, pulling back the drift until the shape beneath it took form. A woman, a grown woman, lying curled on her side, the hem of a once white dress stiff with frost. Her boots were worn, her shawl was gone, her hair brown streaked with gray, was tangled with pine needles and ice, a mail-order bride's wedding dress. He recognized the style immediately. Copper Ridge saw a few every year, women who'd been promised marriage through letters and traveled west, believing in hope more than they believed in self-preservation. Most arrived, some didn't. But he had never found one like this. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Warmth was almost gone, but there a faint pulse, flickering like a candle's last breath. "She's alive," Elias said under his breath. He didn't waste a second more. He shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her stiff body. Then he slid his arms beneath her and lifted her up against his chest. She weighed shockingly little, far too little for a woman of her age. Her head fell softly against his shoulder. Her lips were cracked, tinged with purple. Boone circled once, then barked sharply as if urging him to move. Elias adjusted his grip and began the long walk home, every step deliberate, every breath steadied against the cold. The wind had worsened. Snow whipped sideways, biting at his face and filling his beard with frost. The woman barely stirred. Once, her hand curled weakly around the lapel of his coat, like she was reaching for something she couldn't name. They were still half a mile from the cabin when something slipped out from within the folds of her dress, a torn piece of paper, edges frayed and browned with age, words smudged by melted snow. It fluttered downward and would have been lost beneath the drifts had Boone not barked again and nosed it. Elias bent slightly, snatched it from the wind, and stuffed it into his vest pocket without looking at the writing. There was no time for that now. He pushed forward, muscles burning from the weight of her and the sting of the cold. Boone trotted close beside them, growling at the gusts as though he could bite the wind itself and make the world behave. When the cabin finally came into view, its smoke curling upward in a thin gray line, Elias felt relief loosen something inside his chest. He kicked the door open with his boot, carried the woman straight to the cot near the stove, and laid her down gently. The room was dim, lit only by embers glowing faintly in the belly of the iron stove. He stoked the fire. First, he always tended to fire before injuries, because fire kept them both alive. Flames rose, orange and steady. Then he turned back to her. He removed her frozen boots and her damp gloves, noting the cuts along her knuckles and the swelling in her fingers. He pulled a wool blanket over her and set a pot of water to warm. Her eyes fluttered open only once, barely a second, just long enough for him to see the fear in them, raw and unguarded. "You're safe," he said quietly. It was the only promise he could make, and the only one he believed in, whether she heard him or not. Her breathing steadied just enough to give him hope she'd make it through the night. While she lay motionless under the blankets, Elias took the scrap of paper from his vest. He held it near the stove's light. The ink was blurred. Half the page was missing, but one word, a name, was still visible in faded script grace. Elias frowned. He had heard that name before, long ago, in a town he hadn't set foot in for nearly 20 years. But he pushed the memory aside, folded the paper carefully, and tucked it into the small wooden box where he kept his late wife Mary's things. Some truths were easier to face after the storm passed, not before. As the fire brightened and Boone lay down near the bed, Elias pulled a chair close and settled in for a long night of watching. Outside, the wind screamed against the walls. Inside, her breath wavered softly, the fragile sound of someone caught between holding on and letting go. But she was breathing, and as long as she did, Elias Ward would sit beside her and guard that breath with all he had left to give. The first hours passed with the slow heaviness of winter midnight. Elias kept the fire alive, feeding it piece by piece, careful not to wake the woman unless necessary. His movements were steady. He had spent more nights like this than he cared to count, watching over sick animals, injured travelers, and once, long ago, the last breaths of his wife. He hoped tonight would not echo that memory. The woman's breathing was unsteady. Each inhale seemed to catch halfway, as if her lungs were unsure whether to trust the warmth gathering around her. Her fingers twitched as sensation returned. Her brow tightened now and then, like she was wrestling with something that refused to let go. Boone lay close to the cot, one paw stretched forward, ears alert though his eyes drifted shut. He had chosen his post, and nothing would move him from it. The storm outside eased toward morning. By the time the darkest hour began to lift, the wind no longer screamed against the walls, but murmured with tired resignation. Snow slipped gently from the roof, thudding against the ground in soft collapses. Inside the cabin, the fire burned in a low, bright cradle of orange. Elias leaned back in his chair at last, rubbing the stiffness from his neck. He had not slept, but the quiet in the room was enough to keep exhaustion at bay. Every so often he studied the woman's face, trying to place where he had seen features like those before. Something in the shape of her cheekbones, the faint crease near her lips, nudged a memory he could not yet retrieve. When dawn finally arrived, it came reluctantly, tinting the frosted window with pale blue. That was when she stirred. Her eyes opened only a sliver at first, blinking against the blur of light. She seemed confused by the low ceiling, by the heavy blanket around her, by the warmth her body had not felt in far too long. Her voice was little more than a rasp when she tried to speak. She swallowed hard and tried again. "Where am I?" Elias rose from his chair and moved closer, speaking in a tone that was gentle but firm, the way a man talks to a skittish horse. "You are in my cabin. You're safe now. You were found in the snow. You had almost frozen through." She blinked once, twice. Her gaze drifted toward Boone. The old hound lifted his head, sniffed the air near her hand, then settled down again as if satisfied she meant no harm. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "How long?" "A few hours since I brought you in." "Long enough to worry me?" He ladled warm water into a tin cup and held it near her mouth. "Drink slow." She obeyed, though her hands shook too much to hold the cup herself. When she finished, a faint color returned to her cheeks, almost invisible, but there. She closed her eyes for a moment, fighting for enough strength to speak again. "Thank you." Elias nodded once. He did not welcome praise. He simply did what needed to be done, and he had no patience for embellishment. "What is your name, ma'am?" She hesitated long enough for him to see that even this simple answer carried weight. Her brows furrowed as if she feared giving the wrong name might summon trouble to the door. "Eleanor," she finally whispered. Her voice broke over the second syllable. "Eleanor Grace." Elias felt something shift inside him. Not pain, not alarm, but the faint stir of an old memory brushing against the present. The torn paper he had tucked away the night before suddenly pressed on his thoughts with new meaning. He kept his expression steady. "I am Elias Ward," he said. "This is my place, 10 miles north of Copper Ridge." She looked around the cabin, at the wooden beams dark with age, the simple stove, the single shelf of books, the boots drying beside the hearth. She studied each item as though trying to decide if this was truly a safe place or simply another temporary mercy that would eventually cost her more than it gave. Her breath trembled. I thought I would reach the town before the storm came." "Most people think that," Elias replied quietly. "The plains are not kind to those who travel alone." A shadow crossed her eyes at that, as if his words had touched a fear she carried deep. Her hands curled beneath the blanket, gripping it tight. "Did anyone see me arrive?" she asked. Her voice held something more than worry. It held shame. "No one but me and Boone," he said. "You were far from the main trail." She let out a soft exhale, part relief, part sorrow. She turned her head slightly, looking toward the window where the morning light brightened the frost. "I was supposed to meet someone," she murmured. Her voice trembled again, softer this time. He was meant to be waiting. Elias did not ask who. The pain in her tone was enough. Whatever story lay behind her journey was one she was not ready to speak aloud. And he was not the kind of man to force answers from someone who could barely lift her head. "You need rest more than talk," he said. He ladled the thin porridge into a small bowl and let it cool. "Eat a little. The warmth will help." She managed only a few spoonfuls before her strength gave out. Her head sank back onto the pillow. As she drifted toward sleep again, her lips parted just enough for one more whisper to escape. "I'm sorry for the trouble." Elias paused, studying her, then gave the faintest shake of his head. "Living things don't trouble me," he said softly. "Losing them does." Her eyes fluttered, and she slept again. For a long moment, Elias stood still, his hand resting against the back of the chair. He breathed deep, letting the quiet of the room settle into him. There was something familiar in the presence of a stranger lying under his roof, something that reached into a part of his memory he had not touched for years. He stepped outside to split more wood. The air was crisp, cold enough to bite the inside of the nose, but the storm had passed. The plain stretched outward in a white sweep, untouched except for the trail of footprints he had made carrying her home. Each swing of the axe steadied his thoughts. Each split log landed with a sound that reminded him of order, of tasks he understood, yet her name lingered in his mind. Eleanor Grace. It echoed like the whisper of a half-forgotten place. When he returned inside, Boone lifted his head and thumped his tail once in approval. Elias added fresh wood to the fire, its glow spreading through the room with slow warmth. He glanced at the wooden box on the shelf. The folded piece of paper inside almost felt warm to the touch, as though the truth it held was fighting its way toward the surface. But he did not reach for it. Not yet. Outside, the sun climbed a little higher, turning the snow into a pale field of gold. Inside, the cabin held its breath around a woman who had come from nowhere, yet carried a past that would soon brush against his own. The land was quiet, but something had shifted, and Elias felt it with the certainty of a man who had lived long enough to know when life was about to change. He sat in the chair once more, watching over her as the morning settled fully in, the fire crackling steadily, Boone resting by the door. The long night had ended, but the questions it brought had only begun. The next morning dawned with a gentleness rare for early spring. Thin streaks of sunlight filtered through the frost on the cabin window, casting pale gold along the edges of Eleanor's blanket. The warmth crept slowly across the wooden floorboards, as though unsure if it was welcome after so many bleak days. Elias woke early, as he always did. Habit had trained him long ago to rise with the first gray light. He moved quietly so the sound of boots on the floorboards would not disturb her. Boone lifted his head when Elias reached for his coat, but the old hound stayed resting near the cot, keeping silent guard. Outside, the cold air pressed against his face with a stern greeting. Snow still clung to the fence posts, though here and there patches of dry earth peeked through. Elias shoveled a path toward the woodshed and split enough firewood to last the day. The rhythm steadied him, giving his thoughts room to settle. When he stepped back inside, the fire was still strong. Eleanor had shifted slightly in her sleep, the color in her cheeks deeper than yesterday. That alone brought a quiet relief. Elias set a kettle on the stove and waited for the water to heat. The faint whistle of steam filled the room, soft and steady. He brewed weak coffee, the sort he made on days when his hands had more work to do than his mind. When he turned toward the cot, he saw her eyes open. She watched him with a kind of wary stillness, like someone unsure if she had overstayed her welcome. "Morning," he said, keeping his tone measured. "How do you feel?" Her voice was rough, but stronger than before, less cold, still tired. He nodded. "That is expected. You were near frozen." She pushed herself up on her elbows very slowly, her breath hitching with the effort. Elias moved closer, but stopped at a respectful distance. She managed to sit upright, though she leaned slightly, one hand braced against the wooden frame of the cot. Boone rose and padded closer, resting his graying muzzle near her arm. Eleanor hesitated, then let her fingers slide gently through the fur at his neck. The old dog exhaled, a sound of quiet acceptance. "He likes you," Elias said softly. She looked down at Boone, a faint warmth entering her expression. "I have not been liked by much of anything for a long time." Her words landed heavily, though she spoke them without bitterness. Elias poured a small tin cup of coffee and handed it to her. "Drink it slow. It will warm your chest." She took it carefully, her fingers trembling around the warm metal. The scent rose in thin curls of steam, and she let herself breathe it in. "Thank you," she murmured. Elias pulled a chair near the fire and sat across from her. He did not stare. He simply waited. After a few moments, she lowered the cup into her lap and looked toward the window. "The storm. I thought it would take me. It nearly did." Her eyes flickered. "I kept thinking if I could reach the ridge, maybe someone would see me. But everything went white, and I could not hear anything except the wind." Elias listened without interruption. He understood how a storm could strip away more than warmth. It could take reason, direction, even hope. Eleanor's gaze drifted to her hands. The skin was cracked, bruised, marked with signs of hard travel. "I was told there would be a carriage waiting," she whispered. "A man with a brown hat, and a letter in his coat." She closed her eyes briefly. "I waited until the light foiled. Then I had to choose between leaving or freezing where I stood." "Did anyone at the station help you?" Elias asked. "A few offered words. None offered shelter." She said it without anger, but the truth stung all the same. The West was wide. Kindness did not always stretch far enough to cover it. Elias studied her for a long moment. She carried fatigue deeper than exhaustion, a loneliness carved into her like a wound healed wrong. He stirred the fire, letting the spark rise. "If you had not met Boone," he said quietly, "you might not have been found." She looked at the hound again and reached down to rest her palm gently on his head. "I owe him my life." Boone thumped his tail as if accepting the responsibility with old dignity. Eleanor took another small sip of coffee. Her shoulders relaxed just enough to show trust was possible. Elias cleared his throat. "There is something you should know. Where I found you. It seemed you had traveled a long way off the main trail. It was not a place someone ends up by accident." Her eyes widened slightly, and he immediately regretted saying it so abruptly. The fear in her gaze returned, sharp and defensive. I thought I was following the road, she said. Her voice trembled. I must have turned wrong when the snow began. Everything looked the same. Elias nodded slowly. Storms do that. They can turn a mile into a maze. Her breathing eased a little, though her fingers tightened around the cup. He sensed there were parts of her journey she was not yet ready to speak of, and he was not a man who pried. You can rest here until you regain your strength, he said. No one will bother you. She met his eyes with a mixture of gratitude and caution. I will repay you somehow. Not necessary. It is to me, she whispered. The room fell into a comfortable quiet then. Only the fire and Boone's soft breathing filled the space. Elias stood and walked to the window, looking out across the snowbound plain. Clouds drifted low over the horizon. A few birds circled above the pines, their cries faint and thin. Eleanor watched him with curiosity she did not voice. The cabin seemed larger in the morning light, though it held little more than essentials. A small table, a few books, a coat hung near the door. On the wall, a framed sketch of a valley at sunrise, done in ink. Eleanor's gaze lingered on that drawing. Did you make that? She asked softly. Elias glanced back at her. Surprised. Yes, years ago. It is beautiful. He gave a small shrug, as if dismissing the praise, but she continued looking at the drawing, her eyes tracing the lines. It looks peaceful, like a place untouched by hurt. Elias did not answer, because peace was something he had chased more often than he had caught. She seemed to understand his silence. After a few minutes, she spoke again, quieter this time. I have not felt safe in a long while. Elias turned fully toward her. You are safe here. The words were simple, but spoken with conviction. They settled into the room like a promise. Eleanor lowered her gaze, blinking against the sudden sting of tears she tried to hide. I keep waiting for someone to knock on the door, she said, for someone to say I do not belong here. Elias's voice deepened slightly, firm but gentle. This is my home. I say who belongs. Her breath trembled at that, and she looked away, struggling to steady herself. He let the quiet stretch. Some truths needed space to settle. As the firelight flickered across the room, he noticed something shift within her. A tiny thread of relief, a loosening of the weight she carried. Boone pressed gently against her leg, and she laid her hand on him again. After a time, she whispered, I did not expect kindness, not from a stranger. Elias looked into the fire. Most people arrive in this land seeking something. Some arrive carrying sorrow instead. Kindness is the least we can offer each other. Her eyes softened. For the first time since she woke, she looked at him not with fear, but with quiet recognition, as though she saw in him not just a rescuer, but someone who understood the long ache of loneliness. Outside, a soft wind brushed the cabin walls. The world was still cold, still unforgiving, but inside, something fragile had begun to thaw. Eleanor finished the last sip of her coffee and leaned back against the pillows, her breathing steadier now. Elias settled into his chair once more. He did not speak. He simply stayed close. It was enough. The day stretched ahead of them, uncertain but no longer bleak. A beginning, quiet and tentative, rested between them, and neither of them tried to push it away. By mid-afternoon, the cabin had warmed enough that the air no longer felt brittle. The fire kept a steady pulse, and the scent of simmering broth drifted gently from the stove. Elias moved about the room with quiet purpose, adjusting blankets, checking the stove, tending to small tasks that kept his hands busy, while his mind worked through questions he was not yet ready to ask aloud. Eleanor rested against the wooden frame of the cot, watching the fire through heavy lashes. She looked stronger than the day before, though still pale, still tired in a way that came from weeks of strain rather than the storm alone. Boone settled near her feet, as if guarding not only her life, but whatever fragile calm had begun to form. Elias ladled the broth into a small wooden bowl and approached her with measured steps. You should eat, he said gently. She accepted the bowl with careful hands. The aroma of herbs and soft-cooked vegetables rose in a faint ribbon of steam. She took a slow spoonful, paused as if waiting to see whether her body would accept it, then took another. Thank you, she murmured. Her voice carried no embellishment, only sincerity. Elias nodded once. He watched her eat with the steady gaze of a man who valued small victories. When she finished half the bowl, she set it aside and wiped her fingers on the edge of the blanket. "May I try to stand?" she asked quietly. Elias hesitated. Her body hadn't yet recovered full strength, and he worried she might fall. But he also saw the determination in her expression, the need to regain even a sliver of control. A person who had been lost needed moments of choosing, moments that reminded them they were not at the mercy of circumstance. He stepped closer. "I will help you if you wish." She gave a faint nod. He offered his arm. Her fingers curled around the fabric of his shirt, light as a leaf but firm with resolve. She swung her legs slowly over the edge of the cot, boots absent, toes brushing the warm floorboards. Her breath quickened at the effort. "Take your time," he said. The room grew quiet, except for the crackle of the fire. Eleanor pushed upward, her weight leaning into him. It was a fragile ascent, but a steady one. When she finally stood fully upright, her eyes closed for a moment in relief. "I forgot what it feels like to not be lying down," she whispered. "You did well." She opened her eyes, and for the first time, a faint smile touched the corners of her lips. It was small, fleeting, but real. After a moment, Elias guided her to the nearby chair. She sat carefully, hands gripping the wooden armrest as if the world might tilt without warning. Boone moved closer, nose nudging her ankle. "He likes to be near whoever needs him most," Elias said. She looked down at the hound. "He is loyal. Very. He has outlived 2 winters more than any hound I have owned. I think he is made of something stubborn." Eleanor stroked Boone's head, her eyes softening. "Where did you find him?" she asked. Elias leaned one shoulder against the table, his arms folding loosely. "I did not find him," he replied. "He wandered onto my land 12 years ago, starved, limping, covered in burrs. I thought he would not last the night, but he stayed and kept staying." Her gaze lifted to him. Sometimes the broken ones stay where they feel safe. He felt quiet, struck by how naturally the words slipped from her. She had said them without meaning anything pointed, but truth often worked that way, coming out gently yet cutting deeper than intended. He changed the subject. "If you feel steady, I can show you the window. There is light today. Might do you good." She nodded. He offered his hand again, and she rose slowly, leaning on him just long enough to find her balance. Step by step, they moved toward the wide window near the stove. Eleanor reached the wooden ledge and rested her palms on it. The sunlight touched her face, warming her closed eyelids. The world outside shimmered with a thin blanket of melting snow. Pines stood tall, dark green against the brightness. A pair of prairie birds fluttered between branches, far beyond. The ridges glowed with a soft haze carried by the breeze. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Elias watched her, not the landscape. There was something in her expression he had not seen before, a blend of awe and something quieter, almost reverent. "I thought the West would be harsher," she said, "less forgiving. It can be both." She nodded slowly, as though she had expected nothing else. They stood in silence for a while, the kind of silence that felt like breathing in unison. Eleanor let her fingers drift over the wooden sill, tracing the grain with a gentle motion. Elias noticed how her posture had eased, her shoulders dropping just slightly from their usual guarded tension. After a time, she spoke again. "Do you live alone out here?" He answered simply. "Yes." Her gaze lingered on the snow outside. "Do you ever feel lonely?" Elias hesitated, the answer forming in a deep place within him. "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes not. The land keeps a man company. The wind has a way of speaking to those who listen." She absorbed his words with thoughtful quiet. Then she said something unexpected. "I came here because a man promised I would not be alone again." Elias felt the shift in her voice. He did not prompt her. He simply remained still. "Maybe someday I will tell you the whole of it," she continued, "but not today." "You do not owe me anything," Elias said softly. Her eyes met his, steady and aware. "No. But some stories must be told when the time is right." A faint tremor touched her voice. as if a memory approached too close for comfort. Elias sensed her struggle and turned back toward the stove. "Let me bring you more broth," he said. "You need food if you plan to stand again later." She nodded gratefully, easing herself into the chair again. As Elias ladled broth, he felt her eyes follow his movements. There was no suspicion there now, only a cautious curiosity, a growing trust, fragile but real. When he returned with the bowl, Eleanor cupped it with both hands, letting the warmth soak into her palms. She ate slowly and with better appetite than before. After she finished, Elias gathered his coat and hat. "I will fetch more water from the creek. You will be safe here until I return. Boone will guard the door." Boone lifted his head as if acknowledging his duty. Eleanor looked up. "Be careful." The simple concern surprised him. He gave a quiet nod. Outside. The cold touched his skin, but he barely felt it. His mind drifted back to the woman sitting by his fire, to the fear hidden beneath her calm, to her determination to stand again, to the name she had given him, Eleanor Grace. There was something in it that echoed through an older part of him, stirring a memory he still could not reach. When he returned to the cabin, she was resting again. Boone curled near her feet. The air smelled of broth and warm pine. Elias closed the door softly, aware that the world outside remained wide and uncertain, while the world inside had become something unexpectedly fragile. He sat in his chair across from her, watching the flicker of firelight dance across her peaceful face. For the first time in months, he felt the faint beginning of something he had long forgotten. Hope. The next morning rose with a cool stillness. A thin mist hung just above the snow, softening the shapes of the pines and blurring the horizon into a pale wash of blue and gray. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, leaving warm embers glowing through the thin layer of ash. Elias stirred it gently, coaxing small flames back to life. Eleanor was sitting upright when he turned. Her posture was careful, but steadier than before. She had wrapped herself in a woolen shawl he found the night before, one that once belonged to a family member long gone. The fabric draped softly across her shoulders, giving her a warmth she had not felt in years. Elias approached her with a quiet nod. "You rested well," he said. She folded her hands in her lap. "I woke during the night." "Boone was there." Her voice softened. "It helped?" Elias glanced at the Hound. Boone lifted his head briefly, as if acknowledging the praise. Elias returned to the stove and set a pan over the fire. The smell of cornmeal and warm milk soon filled the room. While he cooked, he felt Eleanor's gaze move around the cabin, lingering on items she had not examined closely before. A clay lantern, a stack of folded cloth, a carved wooden bowl shaped like a shallow canoe. Small pieces of a quiet life lived in slow, patient rhythm. After a while, she asked something unexpected. "Have you lived here all your life?" Elias kept his tone steady. "Most of it. My father built the first cabin on this land. I rebuilt after the fire." "Fire," she repeated softly. Elias did not elaborate. He sensed her curiosity, but also her restraint. Pain recognized pain, and neither of them pushed the other into naming it too soon. When the meal was ready, he placed a wooden plate before her. The porridge steamed lightly, touched with honey he kept for rare occasions. She ate slowly, savoring each bite as if reminding herself she was alive enough to taste again. For some minutes, they shared the quiet and companionable silence. Outside, the wind shifted through the pines with a low, hollow sigh. The sound made Eleanor flinch ever so slightly. Elias noticed. "The storm left its mark," he said gently. She lowered her gaze. It was not only the storm. He waited, sensing the weight behind her words. She breathed in slowly, as though steadying herself. "When I left home," she murmured, "the world felt wider than I was ready for. But I told myself the fear would pass if I kept moving." Her hands tightened on the edge of the plate. Instead, every mile felt heavier. Elias listened without speaking. "I traveled by rail for days. The carriage shook so much I could not sleep. At each stop, I searched for the face I had been promised, but none of them belonged to him." Her voice dipped lower. "People watched me, some with pity, most with curiosity, no one with kindness." Elias felt the truth of that settle around the room, and then she continued. When I reached Copper Ridge, I waited on the bench for him, hour after hour. Everyone passed by. No one spoke to me beyond asking who I was looking for. Her lips pressed together. When I said the name, they grew quiet. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen that reaction before, more times than he wanted to recall. Eleanor swallowed, fighting the memory. One man said he might have left the area weeks ago, perhaps months. Another insisted he never lived in Copper Ridge at all. Her voice wavered. The station keeper told me I should return east, said no woman had reason to wander alone in land like this. She paused, breathing unevenly, her eyes turning distant. But I had nowhere to return to, no home that wanted me, no family left who would welcome me. So I walked, step after step, hoping someone would know the name I carried. The name. Elias kept his face still, though the truth pressed sharply against him. She rubbed her hands together, as though trying to warm them from a cold memory rather than the room. I did not mean to come so far from the road. I kept thinking I saw a cabin in the distance, or heard footsteps behind me. But when I turned, there was nothing. Her voice thinned. I thought maybe the land wanted to swallow me, or maybe it was simply tired of strangers asking to be saved. Elias set his coffee aside. You were not meant to die out there, he said quietly. Why do you say that? If Boone had not found you, the storm would have taken you 2 hours later. But he did find you, and that matters. Eleanor looked down at the Hound again. Boone nudged her foot gently, as if to agree. After a long silence, she asked the question Elias had been expecting. Why did you help me? He answered plainly. Because you are alive, and anything alive deserves a chance to stay that way. She studied him with a thoughtful, searching expression. Elias, she whispered. I did not expect anyone to care whether I lived or not. His jaw tensed. You are mistaken. She blinked, taken aback. Elias stood and moved to the window, the cold morning light brushing the edge of his face. He rested one hand on the sill. In this land, he said softly, we do not survive by turning our backs. Eleanor watched him, her breath caught between gratitude and caution. For a moment, she seemed ready to speak again, but then something pulled her inward, a thought too heavy to release. Elias sensed it. He turned from the window. What troubles you? Eleanor hesitated, her fingers twisted together. That name you asked, when we first met. Her voice faltered. Eleanor Grace is mine, but it is not the name written on the envelope I carried. Elias felt the room shift, a quiet truth approaching. What name was written? He asked. Her eyes glimmered, not with tears, but with the exhaustion of finally admitting something she had held in tightly. Eleanor Marin. Marin is the man I was supposed to wed. Elias felt his breath stop for the briefest moment. He turned fully toward her, and she saw something move in his expression, something deep, something restrained. You know that name? She whispered. Elias did not answer at first. The past he had buried stirred like dust rising from old floorboards. He exhaled slowly. Yes, I know it. She gripped the edge of the blanket. Is he alive? Another pause. Long. Waited. Yes, but he is not the man you believed him to be. Eleanor's lips parted, her breath tightening. You have met him. Elias nodded once. He was my brother. Silence filled the cabin. A deep, echoing silence that reached into both of them, touching old wounds and unanswered questions. Eleanor's eyes widened, the truth settling into her with the force of wind hitting an open door. Your brother? Why did he not come for me? Elias lowered his gaze. Because he leaves things behind. People, promises, homes, anything that requires staying. Her breath broke. She looked toward the floor, lost in a storm of confusion and quiet heartbreak. Elias stepped closer, his voice steady. You are not at fault. You were misled. My brother has been gone from this land for months, perhaps longer. She covered her mouth, fighting the tremor in her voice. And then why? Why send for me? Elias wished he had an answer that would not cut her deeper. I do not know. But whatever reason he had, He abandoned it long before you arrived." Eleanor's hands shook as she pressed them against her knees. Her shoulders curled inward, as if the truth were a cold wind striking an old wound. Elias knelt beside her. "You are not alone here," he said quietly. "Not any more." Her eyes lifted to him, wet with the shock of betrayal, yet warmed by something she did not fully understand. Outside, the wind carried a low murmur across the plain. Inside, the truth had settled between them, fragile but undeniable, and something new, something quiet, something unspoken, began to take root in its place. The revelation rested in the air long after the words had fallen between them. Elias remained kneeling beside Eleanor, though he gave her enough distance for breath. She sat motionless, her hands folded tightly on her lap, as if afraid they might tremble if she loosened her grip. Boone stayed near her feet, sensing the heaviness that had settled across the room. The fire crackled softly, each pop of wood sounding louder than usual in the quiet that followed. After a long while, Eleanor spoke, her voice thin. "So I crossed half the country for a man who never meant to stay." Elias nodded slowly. It was not the nod of agreement, but the nod of someone who recognized sorrow, even before it was spoken. Eleanor looked down, her breath unsteady. "I kept imagining him waiting for me with a kind smile, a warm home, a life where the days did not feel so heavy." She closed her eyes, but I think I knew, somewhere deep inside, that it was too much to hope for. "Hope is never too much," Elias said gently. "It is simply costly." She opened her eyes again, turning toward the fire as though the flames could steady her thoughts. "Did you two part badly?" she asked softly. "You and your brother?" Elias shifted his weight, rising to sit on the edge of the cot across from her. The memory was not one he often opened, yet seeing her struggle stirred something old and unguarded within him. "We parted as men do when they want different lives," he said. "He sought movement. I sought stillness. We could not share a roof without the walls straining." Eleanor listened, her brows drawn slightly, as though reading past the words. "He hurt you," she whispered. Elias gave a quiet exhale. "Not in ways that leave marks, but some wounds do not show on the skin." Her gaze softened, full of a reluctant understanding. "I know that feeling." Elias looked toward the window. The early morning light was beginning to gather strength, brightening the frost along the lower panes. He left this land without a word. Elias continued. "I found his tracks disappearing into the pines, and by dusk they were gone." His voice deepened, and so was he. Eleanor absorbed this silently, her own sorrow blending with the shape of his. "Did you search for him?" she asked. "For a time?" Then the land answered with its own silence, and I accepted it. Eleanor's shoulders relaxed as she breathed out slowly. "It seems he leaves silence behind wherever he goes." Elias's voice lowered. "He does, but that silence is not your burden." She blinked, her lips parting slightly. "Yet it feels like mine." Elias leaned forward, his tone steady. "You carry hurt handed to you by a man who never earned your trust. That pain is real, but it is not your fault." Her breath trembled at the tenderness of the words. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her without judgment or impatience. The silence that followed was gentler now, as though the truth shared between them had softened the edges of the room. After a moment, Elias stood. "You should rest a little longer," he said. "I am tired," she admitted. He helped her ease back onto the cot, arranging the blankets so they did not weigh too heavily on her. Boone settled beside her again, folding his paws neatly under his chest. Eleanor gazed at the dog with quiet affection. "I think Boone saved more than my life," she said faintly. "He saved what remained of my courage." Elias felt a warmth spread through him at hearing her speak with such honesty. He has a habit of doing that. She smiled, though faint, and closed her eyes. Elias remained in his chair, watching her breathing slow to a peaceful rhythm. The weight of the morning's confession pressed against him, stirring thoughts he had locked away for years. He wondered if Maren was still wandering the land, the same way he always had, leaving promises undone behind him like broken branches on a trail. Outside, the mist began to lift, the sun pushed through, painting the snow in soft hues of pale gold. When Eleanor finally woke again, the light had shifted, glowing warmer across the wooden floor. Her eyes opened slowly, as if adjusting not just to the brightness, but to a world that felt subtly changed. "Are you hungry?" Elias asked. "A little?" He prepared a small portion of stew left from the night before. When he handed it to her, she ate with calmer movements, her body no longer trembling from fear or cold. After she finished, she looked at him with steady eyes. "Elias, may I ask you something difficult?" He set his hands on his knees. "Ask what you wish." She paused, gathering courage. "When you look at me, do you see someone your brother left behind?" Elias shook his head immediately. "No, I see a woman who survived what would have broken others." Her eyes glimmered. "I am not sure I survived," she whispered. "You are here, and that is its own kind of survival." Her throat tightened, but she did not look away. Then she asked something even quieter, almost hesitant. "Do you think I should return east?" He answered with care. "Only if you wish to. Not because you were made to feel unwelcome here." She breathed in slowly, her fingers tightening lightly around the edge of the blanket. "I do not wish to return." Elias nodded. "Then you will not." The firmness in his tone steadied her, grounding her in a way she had not felt for years. The idea that she had the right to choose her path, rather than follow one chosen for her, seemed to touch something fragile inside her. She looked around the cabin again, her gaze lingering on the carved bowl, the old books, the sturdy table worn smooth by years of use. The space felt humbler now, more human, less like a place she might disrupt simply by breathing within it. Elias rose and walked to the door. "I will check the traps near the ridge before dusk," he said. "You should stay inside. The cold is still sharp in the shade." She nodded without argument. "Boone will stay with you," he added. Eleanor looked toward the Hound with a small smile. "Of course he will." Elias hesitated before reaching for the door latch. His voice lowered. "You are safe here. Eleanor, nothing will come through this door without my knowing." Her eyes softened, touched by a mixture of relief and gratitude she could not put into words. "Thank you," she whispered. He stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him. For a moment, Eleanor sat in the quiet room, listening to the muffled sound of boots crunching over snow as he disappeared toward the tree line. The fire glowed steady. Boone lifted his head and pressed it lightly against her leg. She brushed her hand over his fur, feeling warmth return not only to her fingers but to a deeper place inside her. For the first time since her journey began, she let herself believe she was not merely surviving. She might actually be beginning again. The afternoon light softened as Elias made his way toward the ridge. The path was familiar beneath his boots, worn smooth by years of steady footsteps. Pines rose on either side, tall and unmoving, their branches brushing together with the faint whisper carried by the cold breeze. The air smelled of resin and melting frost. Each breath sharpened his thoughts. He walked with purpose, yet his mind lingered on the woman resting in his cabin. Eleanor Grace, Eleanor Marin, a stranger, yet not entirely. A name tied to the very man he wished to forget. Elias adjusted the strap of his satchel, reminding himself that distance sometimes helped a man see clearly. He needed the quiet of the land now more than ever, a place where thoughts settled without the weight of walls around them. Boone was not at his side today, and the absence of the old Hound made the woods feel a shade too still. Elias had left him with Eleanor intentionally, sensing she needed the soft comfort of fur and loyal company more than he needed the dog's presence near the ridge. When he reached the first trap, he crouched beside it. Snow dusted the metal frame, untouched. He reset the spring, brushed frost from the latch, then continued down the trail. His movements were habitual, precise, the motions of a man who had learned patience from the land itself. Yet as he walked, unwanted memories drifted toward him like slow shadows. Marin, younger by 8 years, bright smile that fooled easily, a restless spirit, never able to stay long enough to let roots take hold. Elias remembered the day his brother arrived begging for shelter after months of wandering. The two men had shared a meal in strained silence. Marin had spoken of hopes, plans, a new start. Elias had listened, knowing promises meant little without action. Then one morning, Marin was simply gone. leaving behind an empty chair and a hollow quiet. Elias wondered now if that same charm had been woven into the letters sent to Eleanor, if his brother had written with flowery words and bold promises, knowing she wanted to believe in something warm, something new. The thought tightened Elias's jaw. Though his anger was not directed at her, the traps along the ridge offered little distraction. Most were empty. One held signs of disturbance, but whatever creature had approached it had escaped with clever determination. Elias reset each one carefully. As he worked, the forest shifted around him. The breeze cooled. Light narrowed between branches. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, a sharp echo through the stillness. Elias straightened, pressing his glove against the trunk of a pine. He felt the familiar ache behind his ribs. The one that reminded him loneliness had not always come from choice. The land had taken his wife. His nearest neighbor had fallen ill 2 winters ago, and Marin had walked away without looking back. Solitude had become a companion he knew well, yet the cabin no longer felt quite so empty. He found himself thinking of Eleanor's voice, soft but gaining strength. The way she touched Boone's fur with careful gratitude. The way she listened, not out of suspicion, but out of quiet respect. The way truth settled in her eyes when she admitted fear, exhaustion, and the sting of betrayal. He admired her courage, though he had not said so aloud. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he moved toward the main clearing. The sky above shifted into pale shades of rose and amber. Sunset was still hours away, but the light had begun its slow descent. Elias paused at the ridge, letting his gaze stretch across the wide plains. The land below shimmered faintly as melting snow reflected the sun. Small clusters of brush stood resilient against the cold. A thin line of river snaked through the valley, catching light like a silver thread. It would be a hard season for anyone new to this place. Harder still for a woman who had already endured so much. He thought of her sitting by the fire, holding the wooden bowl of stew with trembling hands. He thought of the way she had confessed her doubts, her fear of returning east, her unwillingness to be a burden. He thought of her voice when she asked if he saw her only as the woman his brother had abandoned. He had given her the truth, but even that truth felt like only the beginning of something deeper. A gust of wind touched his coat and carried with it the faint smell of the cabin chimney, wood smoke drifting lightly across the plain. He realized then that part of him wanted to return quickly, to ensure Eleanor was safe, warm, and no longer lost in the ache of her thoughts. He turned back toward home. The walk was slow, unhurried. Every now and then, he heard small movements in the brush, the stirring of wildlife preparing for dusk. A lone deer stood near the edge of the clearing, its ears twitching. When their eyes met, the creature held still for a breath, then slipped into the trees without sound. As Elias neared the cabin, he noticed thin trails of smoke rising through the chimney. The glow inside flickered gently against the window panes. A warm pulse of light, a sign of life. He stepped onto the porch and brushed snow from his boots before entering. The wood door creaked softly as he pushed it open. Inside, the cabin carried a warmth deeper than fire alone. Eleanor was sitting on the chair near the window, wrapped in the shawl, her posture relaxed. Boone lay asleep at her feet, chin resting on his paws. Eleanor turned her head slightly when he entered. "You are back sooner than I expected," she said. He removed his coat and hung it near the door. The traps were quiet today, and the light was fading faster than it seemed. She studied him for a moment. "Did something trouble you out there?" Elias met her gaze. The question was gentle, not probing, a question born from genuine concern, not curiosity. "No," he said quietly. The land was calm. She nodded, though her eyes lingered on him, as if she sensed more beneath his words. Boone lifted his head then, noticing Elias's scent, and patted across the floor to nudge his hand. Elias scratched behind the hound's ears, then moved toward the fire. "Are you warm enough?" he asked. "Yes." "Much better. I even walked a little while you were gone." He turned toward her sharply, a concern tightening his expression. "You should not push yourself too quickly." She smiled faintly. "I only crossed the room." Boone followed me like a shadow. Elias exhaled, tension easing slightly. "Good, but take care." She watched him with softened eyes. "I will." The light continued shifting across the cabin walls, casting patterns that danced gently with the flame. Elias added wood to the stove and sat down across from her. For a moment, neither spoke, but the silence was a kind one. Then Eleanor asked a question so quietly he nearly missed it. "Elias, do you resent that I came here?" He looked up sharply. "No." Her breath eased, though she did not look entirely convinced. "You have already done more for me than anyone has in years," she whispered. "I do not want to be an unwelcome reminder of someone who hurt you. You are not that." She lifted her eyes. "What am I, then?" The fire cracked softly. Elias took a slow breath. "Someone who deserves safety. Someone who deserves truth. Someone who deserves to be here." Eleanor's lips parted slightly, her breath catching as though the warmth of his words reached deeper than she expected. "Thank you," she murmured. Outside, the wind quieted. Inside, something settled between them, gentle yet unmistakably present. The beginning of trust, the faintest seed of something neither could name, but both felt. Night settled slowly over Alder Creek, letting its darkness climb the hills one ridge at a time. Elias stirred the embers in the stove, coaxing the faint glow into a steady burn. Eleanor rested on the small bed he had prepared near the hearth, the shawl pulled gently up to her chin. Boone lay curled against the side of the cot, as if guarding her dreams. Elias sat at the table, his hands still, his thoughts shifting quietly beneath the dim lantern light. The silence in the cabin was warm rather than hollow, filled with the soft breathing of two souls trying to make peace with their pasts. He was trying to untangle something inside himself, a growing pull he had not invited, yet could not ignore. He reached for the old tin cup beside him, letting the rising steam soften the cold in his chest. The day had been long, but the weight he felt did not come from miles walked or traps tended. It came from the look in Eleanor's eyes when she asked whether he resented her. It came from the steady calm that washed through him whenever she spoke softly into the room, and it came from knowing that the moment Myron returned, everything would shift, and he would have no control over it. The lantern flickered, casting wavering shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the wind skimmed over the snow, brushing the door with a faint rustle. Elias leaned back in his chair, listening to the land settle for the night. A soft voice drifted toward him. "You are awake." He turned. Eleanor had pushed herself slightly upright, her eyes half open, the firelight reflecting in them. Her voice carried a faint rasp, like a melody touched by cold wind. "I did not mean to wake you," he said quietly. "I was not fully asleep," she answered, shifting a little. "The warmth is helping, but my mind, it wanders too easily when everything is still." He hesitated before asking, "What troubles you?" Eleanor lowered her gaze to the edge of the blanket. "The same things that troubled me on the train, and on the road, and in the storm." She paused, drawing a slow breath. "But they feel different here, less heavy, less certain, as if the ground under me is changing shape." Elias rose and approached the hearth, adding another piece of wood to the fire. The flames brightened and cast a warmer glow across her face. "Change can be slow," he said, "and often it feels unsteady at first." She watched him carefully. "Do you think I can belong here?" A long silence followed. The question felt heavier than it sounded. He sensed she was not asking about the cabin or the valley. She was asking about something deeper, a place in someone's life, a place in someone's trust. He sat on the wooden stool beside her bed. Belonging is not something given. It grows slowly, like the land thawing after winter. You are already finding your footing. Eleanor, her eyes softened, and for a moment she seemed younger than her years, fragile and brave at the same time. "I want to believe that," she whispered. "Then believe it when you can." Elias replied gently, "And when you cannot, let the days remind you." A faint smile touched her lips before fading into a thoughtful quiet. Elias returned to his chair, yet Eleanor's presence continued to pull at him like a quiet tide. He felt a warmth he had not allowed himself in years. Not hope, not yet. Something gentler, a tender awareness building like low coals beneath ash. He took another sip from his tin cup and let the quiet stretch between them Outside, the night deepened. Stars flickered through thin clouds. The wind shifted direction, brushing against the cabin like a warning. Then Boone's head lifted sharply. The hound's ears twitched. A low sound rumbled in his throat. Elias straightened, eyes narrowing. He knew Boone's instincts better than any man knew his own heartbeat. The dog did not growl without reason. Eleanor sensed it too. She pushed herself upright again, gripping the edge of the blanket. "Is something wrong?" Elias rose and crossed to the window, careful not to disturb the lantern. He wiped a small patch of frost from the glass and peered into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing, only the snow-covered clearing, the shadowed pines, and the faint shimmer of moonlight stretching across the valley. But then he noticed them. Footprints, fresh ones, leading toward the cabin from the tree line. They had not been there earlier. He felt a cold pressure tighten in his chest. He stepped away from the window, his voice calm but firm. Someone has been near the ridge. And they walked close to the cabin. Eleanor's breath caught. "Do you think it is him?" There was no need to say the name. Not tonight. Not yet. Ellis paused, the flickering fire reflecting in his eyes. "I do not know, but whoever it was, they lingered longer than a wanderer passing through." Boone growled again, low and warning. Eleanor pressed her hand against her collarbone. "I do not want to see Marin again. Not yet. Not like this." Elias moved closer, stopping only when he was certain she could see the steadiness in his expression. "You are safe here," he said. "No one will cross that threshold without my knowing." Her shoulders eased slightly, though her eyes remained alert. "What will you do?" He looked toward the rifle resting above the mantel, but did not reach for it. "I will keep watch until dawn. If someone comes, I will deal with it." She watched him for a long moment, her expression carrying unspoken gratitude wrapped in fear. Elias stepped back, pulled his coat over his shoulders, and positioned a chair near the door. Boone settled beside him, body tense, nose pointed toward the faint scent drifting from beneath the doorframe. Eleanor lay back slowly, though sleep would not soon claim her. The fire warmed her skin, but her thoughts stirred like unsettled dust. Elias remained silent, listening to the land breathe outside. The scrape of branches, the distant cry of an animal, the faint tremble of wind shifting again. He kept his gaze on the window. Hours passed in a slow rhythm, marked by the crackle of wood and the steady rise and fall of Boone's wary breaths. Midnight settled deep into the valley, stretching time thin and heavy. Elias did not move from his watch. He thought of the footprints. He thought of Eleanor's fear. He thought of the unspoken tension growing between him and his unseen brother. And somewhere in those thoughts, he felt something shift in himself, a quiet vow taking form. He had offered Eleanor safety, but what stirred inside him was deeper than protection. It was the aching beginnings of something he had not allowed in years. As the first faint hint of dawn touched the horizon, he finally relaxed his shoulders. Boone's ears lowered. The tension in the cabin eased a fraction. Morning had not yet come, but the long night had passed. Eleanor whispered into the quiet. "Elias, are you still there?" "Yes," he answered gently. She breathed out a trembling sigh of relief. "Thank you." He looked toward her, meeting her tired eyes through the dim glow. "Rest now," he said softly. "The day will bring its own answers, and I will be here." Eleanor closed her eyes, trusting his words. Outside, the world shifted toward dawn. Inside, something stronger than fear began to take root. Morning arrived cautiously, as if testing the air before stepping fully into the valley. A pale gold ribbon stretched across the horizon, thinning the darkness little by little. Frost clung to the edges of the window pane, catching the new light like tiny shards of glass. Elias had not moved from his chair beside the door. Hours had passed, but his posture remained steady, anchored by purpose. Boone rested with his head on Elias's boot, half asleep yet alert enough to rise at the slightest sound. Eleanor shifted beneath the blanket, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment she looked uncertain of where she was. Then recognition settled gently on her features. Her voice emerged in a low murmur. "You stayed awake all night." Elias turned toward her, offering a faint nod. "It was quiet for the most part." She sat up carefully, brushing hair from her forehead. Her expression held both worry and gratitude. "You should rest." "I will. Just not yet." She studied him, noticing the fatigue hidden in the calm lines of his face. "Were the tracks still there?" she asked, her hands tightening on the blanket. "Or did the night cover them?" No, Elias rose from the chair, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. Snow drifted a little over them, but the shape remained. Someone came close. Eleanor. Close enough to see the lantern light from inside. A shadow of fear flickered across her eyes, and they left without knocking. "Yes?" She dropped her gaze. "Do you think it was Marin?" Elias hesitated. He did not want to confirm her fear, but neither would he offer false comfort. It might have been, or it might have been someone passing through who recognized the place and did not wish to be seen. Eleanor lifted her head slowly. Most people who pass through these lands do not mind being noticed. That was true. Travelers tended to stop, ask for directions, or request water. No one walked silently to the edge of a man's home unless they had business that could not be named aloud. Elias stirred the fire, letting the flames brighten before speaking again. "We will walk the yard after breakfast. I want to see whether the tracks lead further than the ridge." Eleanor nodded, though the fear had not left her. It lingered beneath her ribs, like an echo she could not silence. He ladled warm broth into a tin cup and handed it to her. She accepted it with both hands, the rising steam touching her face gently. While she drank, Elias stepped outside. The cold bit at his cheeks immediately. Snow stretched across the yard like an unbroken sheet, except for one winding disturbance leading from the tree line toward the window. Someone had stood there, watching. The tracks were deep enough that whoever it was had paused, not merely passed by. Elias crouched and pressed his palm to one of the indentations, reading its story the way he read animal tracks. A single rider, likely dismounted, boots worn at the heel, a gait slightly uneven. His jaw tightened. Marin had favored his left leg for years after a bullet grazed him along the border, but Elias did not leap to conclusions. Not yet. He followed the prints to the edge of the clearing. Beyond that, the snow thinned beneath the pines, muddling the pattern. Whoever had come did not wish to be tracked further. He stood there for a long moment, letting the quiet seep into him. His breath mingled with the cold air, carrying a tightness he had not felt in years. Boone joined him at his side, nose brushing the snow gently. Inside the cabin, Eleanor watched through the window. She saw Elias as a dark silhouette against the white landscape, steady and solitary, as if he belonged to the land more than any man she had ever known. When he returned, she lowered her eyes but could not hide the relief softening her shoulders. "Anything new?" she asked. He hung his coat by the door. "Nothing certain." But the person did not linger near the woods. They moved west, toward the old trail. She wrapped her arms around herself. "Then he is close." Elias met her gaze, his expression calm and sure. "Whoever came will not get near you again without my knowing." Eleanor held his eyes for a long moment before nodding faintly. She rose from the cot slowly. Though her body was healing, there was still a faint tremor in her legs. When she stood fully, Elias stepped toward her but stopped himself just short of touching. "Are you steady?" he asked. "I think so." "Even so." He remained close as she crossed the room, offering presence rather than assistance. She reached the chair by the window and lowered herself gently into it. From there, she could see the woods where the footprints disappeared. The silence between them was not cold. It was patient, like the space needed for thoughts to settle. After several minutes, Eleanor spoke quietly. "Elias, may I ask you something about your brother?" His posture stiffened, though only slightly. "You may. What kind of man was he?" Before he left, Elias stood by the table, fingers brushing the old grain of the wood as though grounding himself. He was charming, quick with his words, quick with his heart, too, though he rarely kept it in the same place for long. "That sounds like someone who could make many promises," she whispered. He nodded. He did, and break them. He nodded again, slower this time. She turned her eyes toward the fire. "He wrote to me as if he had been shaped by kindness, by longing for a home, by wanting something lasting." She looked back at Elias with a sorrow that did not ask for pity. But I think he only wanted to be wanted. Elias swallowed hard. Her words struck deeper than she intended. He stepped closer to her chair. Eleanor, you did nothing wrong in believing what he told you. People like him, she said softly, they know how to write dreams. And people like me. She paused, gathering breath. People like me want to believe them. He shook his head gently. People like you want to believe there is goodness in others. That is not a fault. Her eyes lifted to his, shimmering with something fragile. And you, what do you believe, Elias? He spoke with care. I believe some people leave shadows behind them, but some bring light without trying. His voice lowered. I believe you deserve the light. Her breath caught, trembling slightly. Elias stepped back before the closeness became something she might not be ready for. He moved toward the stove, placing his hands on the cast iron to warm them. Hours passed in a slow rhythm. Eleanor helped tidy the small table, folding blankets, sorting what little she had brought. The movements were soft, deliberate. She moved with the care of someone relearning the difference between safety and vigilance. Outside, the sun climbed higher, glinting off snow-covered branches. The world felt still, yet watchful, as if waiting. In the afternoon, a faint whistle of wind brushed past the cabin walls. Eleanor paused mid-task, her hands resting on a folded cloth. Elias looked up from sharpening a tool, meeting her eyes instantly. Do you hear that? She asked. The sound faded as quickly as it came. Just wind, Elias said, but his gaze drifted to the window again. He did not believe it. Not entirely. Eleanor walked toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. If Myron returns, will you confront him? Elias set the sharpening stone down, his expression steady. If he comes here, I will speak to him, but I will not allow him to unsettle your life again. Her breath trembled. And if he asks for me, he answered without hesitation, you will choose what happens then, not him. Her shoulders loosened as if a weight was lifted. Thank you, Elias. No one has ever spoken to me as if my choices mattered. His voice softened. They matter here. Evening approached, bringing longer shadows stretching across the yard. The fire grew brighter against the dimming world. Elias pulled the shutters closed while Eleanor prepared the lamp. As she lit it, she paused and looked at him. Elias. Yes. I am not afraid of being found. Not anymore. Only of losing what I finally feel here. He stepped closer, the glow from the lamp casting warm lines across his face. You have not found everything yet. There is more waiting for you than fear. She held his gaze, and for a moment the room felt suspended, untouched by the past or the approaching shadows, and outside, far beyond the window, the faint echo of distant footsteps faded into the growing night. Dawn rose pale and quiet, as if the world were holding its breath. A thin veil of fog drifted across Alder Creek, softening the sharp lines of the pines and hills. The air carried a stillness that felt almost fragile, like a moment suspended between one truth and another. Elias stepped outside to check the traps near the ridge, leaving Boone to watch over Eleanor. She sat by the window as she often did in the morning hours, wrapped in the wool shawl he had given her, watching the light settle over the valley. Some days the world seemed too vast for her still tender heart, yet she stared at it with the bravery of someone choosing to live, even when breathing still hurt. She noticed something unusual near the edge of the yard long before Elias returned. A small, dark shape in the snow. No movement, no sound. At first she thought it was a fallen branch or a scrap of hide blown by the wind, but it carried a shape too deliberate, a neatness the land itself would not have crafted. Eleanor rose, steadying herself with her hand on the windowsill. Boone, she whispered. The dog lifted his head, ears pricked. Eleanor reached for her boots. Her pulse quickened, but not with the sharp fear that once claimed her. This was something quieter, an ache mixed with curiosity. She stepped outside, the cold brushing against her face. Boone patted at her side, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his fur through her dress. The object lay a few yards from the door. Her breath hitched the moment she saw it clearly. A folded envelope, edges stiff with frost, her name written across the front in a hand she recognized. Eleanor froze, her fingertips trembling before they even touched the paper. Boone nudged her leg softly, sensing the shift inside her. She knelt down and lifted the envelope. The cold had stiffened it, but the ink was unmistakably Marin's. His handwriting carried a flourish that always felt like a promise dressed in charm. For a long moment, Eleanor did not move. The air felt thin around her. The snow seemed too bright. By the time she stood, Elias had returned from the ridge. He spotted her immediately, still as a post in the middle of the yard. Boone pressed against her side. His pace quickened, the traps bouncing lightly against his shoulder. "Eleanor," he called gently, "are you all right?" She did not answer until he stood beside her. He followed her gaze to the envelope in her hand. "He was here again," she whispered. Elias studied the envelope, the snow around it, the solitude of the valley. The tracks from last night had not returned, yet the silence held evidence that someone had watched, waited, approached while they slept. "Let me see it," he said quietly. She handed it to him with fingers that trembled but did not retreat. Elias turned the envelope over. "No seal, just the name, her name." He opened it with careful movements, aware she watched every small shift in his expression. Inside was a single page. Elias read silently, jaw tightening the longer his eyes moved across the lines. When he finished, he lowered the letter slowly. "He wants to see me," Eleanor said before he could speak. Her voice carried neither longing nor fear, only a deep exhaustion. Elias handed her the paper. She read Myron's words in a slow, steady murmur. "Eleanor, I came for you. I never meant for you to suffer. I was delayed. Circumstances changed. But I am here now. Meet me at the base of the West Ridge before the next snowfall. We can leave this place behind and start again. No explanations needed, only trust. Yours, Myron." When she finished, the page slipped slightly in her hands. She caught it before it fell. Elias stepped closer but did not touch her. "You do not owe him a meeting." Her eyes lifted to his. There was hurt in them, but also something stronger, something growing. "I do not know what I owe anymore," she whispered. Elias exhaled slowly. "You owe yourself peace. Nothing else." Eleanor looked away, toward the West Ridge. A faint line of trees marked the horizon, blurred by the morning fog. Her voice softened. "I want to know why he left me to die, but I am not sure I want to hear his answer." Elias's gaze warmed, though a silent storm churned inside him. "Then you will decide when you are ready, and you will not go alone." Her eyes widened slightly. "Elias, you cannot confront him for me. I can stand beside you. That is different." She swallowed a breath that stung on the way down. "I do not want anyone hurt," she murmured. "Not for me. Not because of him." Elias looked toward the ridgeline. "Sometimes the truth hurts more than a confrontation, and sometimes it frees you." Eleanor clutched the letter to her chest, the paper creasing against her fingers. She walked back to the cabin with slow, heavy steps. Elias followed, Boone trailing between them like a bridge. Inside, she sat at the table, laying the letter flat before her. Elias waited a few feet away, giving her space. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I want to hear what he has to say, not because I believe him, but because I need to understand what part of me believed him once." Elias closed his eyes briefly, accepting her decision. "When do you want to go?" "Tomorrow morning," she said, "before I lose my resolve." He nodded. "You will not lose it. You are stronger than you think." She gave him a faint smile that trembled at the edges. "So are you." He looked away, the warmth in her words settling deeper than he expected. The rest of the day moved slowly. Eleanor prepared herself in quiet ways. She braided her hair with deliberate calm. She mended a seam on her glove. She wrote a few lines in a small journal Elias had given her, though she did not let him read them. Elias spent the afternoon reinforcing the doorframe and shutter locks, a silent response to the visit that had come without knocking. He moved with steady purpose, but inside him, tension grew like a rope gradually pulled taut. As evening crept over the valley, Eleanor approached him where he stood near the woodpile. "Elias," she said softly. Are you afraid of what tomorrow brings? He looked at her, the pale dusk light softening the planes of his face. I am not afraid for myself, only for what it may stir in you. She wrapped her arms around her middle. I'm afraid of the way he once made me feel seen, as if I were finally someone worth choosing. Elias took a slow step closer. You are worth choosing. You always were. He simply was not the man to see it clearly. Her breath caught a fragile sound in the cold air. You see it. He did not look away. Yes. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, letting those words settle into old wounds, easing the ache long lodged beneath her ribs. When she opened them again, she looked stronger somehow. We meet him tomorrow, she said, but I will not let him decide who I am any more. Elias nodded once, and I will be beside you every moment. Night deepened, the sky darkening to a deep blue. The lantern inside the cabin flickered, casting warm light out onto the snow. They stood there, two silhouettes carved against the fading day, waiting for a tomorrow that promised both reckoning and release. And in the distance, far beyond their sight, someone waited at the base of the West Ridge. Morning came without hurry, brushing the valley in a pale wash of light. A thin cold settled over the world, gentler than the days before, yet steady enough to remind them winter still held the land in its firm grip. Elias lit the stove long before Eleanor rose, letting the warmth expand through the cabin with a quiet patience. He moved with deliberate calm, though his mind traveled restlessly ahead to the ridge where Marin waited. Eleanor stepped from the small room near the hearth, her movements careful but no longer timid. She wore the coat Elias had repaired for her, and the gloves she had mended by lamplight the evening before. Her hair, braided neatly, fell over one shoulder. The shawl wrapped around her carried a faint scent of pine, taken from the fresh branches Elias had tucked near the hearth to dry. Boone rose the moment she appeared. The dog circled her once, as if checking each step for certainty, before sitting at her feet with calm expectancy. Elias watched her quietly. Are you ready? He asked. Eleanor looked toward the window. The ridge sat as a distant silhouette, sharpened by the early light. Her breath fogged the glass slightly before fading. I do not know if anyone ever feels ready for a moment like this, she said in a voice soft but steady. But I am willing. That will have to be enough. Elias nodded, accepting her words as truth rather than hesitation. They ate a modest breakfast together. Bread warmed on the stove, a small piece of dried meat, hot tea steeped with a few pine needles. Neither spoke much during the meal, but there was a quiet understanding in the room that held them both steady. When they finally stepped outside, the snow gave under their boots with a softened crunch. The sky carried a faint silver glow. The air was sharp enough to redden their cheeks, but it felt clean and honest in a way Eleanor had come to appreciate. Boone led the way for the first few yards, before dropping back to walk between them, as if he sensed the gravity of the journey and wanted to keep them together. The trail toward the West Ridge wound gradually upward. Elias had chosen a path that avoided the steeper climbs so Eleanor would not tire too quickly. She walked with a focus that reminded him of someone crossing old ground, not with fear, but with determination. After a long stretch of quiet steps, Eleanor finally spoke. Elias, what do you think he will say when I arrive? Elias considered his answer. People like Marin often speak in ways that hide what they do not wish to face. He may apologize without accepting fault. He may explain without telling the truth. He paused for a moment. He may weave words to test your heart again. Eleanor's breath tightened, though she kept walking. Then how do I protect myself? Elias slowed his pace slightly, so she would not feel rushed. Stand in what you know now, not what you wished was true then. And remember, you do not face him alone. Eleanor touched the letter folded in her coat pocket. Do you think I owe him any part of myself? No, Elias answered without hesitation. You owe him nothing that costs you peace. She walked in silence for a few moments, her hands brushing the edges of her shawl. I spent so long believing every kindness from him meant something lasting. I thought if I could be worthy enough, he would stay. But I was trying to hold on to a shadow, not a man. Elias looked at her with a quiet, steady gaze. Shadows only grow large when the light behind them is strong. You were the light. He was only the figure passing through it. Eleanor drew a slow breath, letting his words settle into places she had never known needed healing. They continued up the slope, the ridge drawing closer, the trees thinning as the land opened into a small plateau. The wind shifted slightly, carrying a faint familiar scent that made Elias stop. Smoke. He raised his hand to signal Eleanor. Boone froze beside them, nose lifted, tail stiff. Eleanor whispered, "He is close." Elias listened for several moments before guiding her forward again, not with fear, just caution. The smoke grew more distinct, rising in a thin line between two boulders near the crest. As they stepped around the final stretch of rock, they saw him, Elias Ward, tall, lean, coat weathered from miles traveled, boots worn at the heel, the left one dragging faintly. His hat lay beside a small fire, and his horse grazed nearby, its breath creating soft clouds in the cold air. Marin turned at the sound of their steps. For a moment, the valley held its breath. Eleanor felt her pulse press against her ribs. Elias felt the familiar weight of the past settle on his shoulders. Boone stood like a sentinel, fur slightly raised. Marin's eyes widened with recognition, first at Eleanor, then at Elias. He recovered his composure quickly, yet something in his expression betrayed a flicker of unease. "Eleanor," he said, stepping forward, "you came." His voice carried the same warmth that once filled his letters, the same charm, the same sweetness that had once felt like safety. Eleanor did not move toward him. "I came because I needed answers," she said calmly, "not because I believed your words." Marin's smile faltered for a heartbeat, then reshaped itself. "I know I failed you. I never meant to. Circumstances changed. I was delayed. I wanted to return for you." Eleanor lifted her chin. "You wanted to return. But you did not. You left me in a place I did not know, with no one to call by name. You left me to die in a storm." Marin's gaze flickered. "I thought you would wait at the station." "I waited," she said quietly, "until my hands turned numb, until the cold reached my bones, until standing still meant choosing death. I walked because I had no choice left." Marin opened his mouth to speak, but Elias stepped forward with a controlled calm that made the air between them tighten. "Why did you write to her in the first place?" "Marin." Marin's smile thinned. "You always ask the questions that cut the deepest." "Brother." Elias did not look away. "Answer it." Marin's posture stiffened. His jaw worked once before he spoke. "I wrote because I thought she would be someone who understood me, someone who needed what I could give, someone who would not ask for more than I had." Eleanor's voice trembled with restrained hurt. "You wanted someone who needed you so you did not have to be responsible for who you were." Marin's eyes darkened. "You make it sound cruel." Elias stepped closer. "It was cruel." The wind swept across the ridge, carrying the tension through the clearing. Marin looked at Eleanor again, his voice softening. "Eleanor, we can still go. I meant every word I wrote. You and I can start again. Leave all this behind." Eleanor stared at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly. "I am not leaving with you. Not now. Not ever." Marin's face tightened. "You would choose him over me. I would choose myself," she answered, "and he lets me do that." Marin's gaze flicked to Elias, resentment simmering beneath the surface. "You always take what I reach for." Elias met his eyes steadily. "I have taken nothing that was yours." Silence stretched across the ridge, heavy as unbroken snow. Eleanor stepped back toward Elias. Boone shifted protectively in front of her. Marin looked at her once more, realization settling in his expression. "You are no longer the woman who stepped off that train." Eleanor shook her head. "No, I am someone who survived that night, and I am someone who sees clearly now." Marin exhaled sharply, frustration and loss mingling in the sound. He turned away, pacing once, twice, before finally stopping at the fire. "Then there is nothing left to say," he muttered. Eleanor's voice was soft but firm. "There is one thing. I forgive you. Not for you. For me." Marin froze. "Forgiveness," she continued, "is not an invitation. It is a closing door. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Something complicated flickered in his expression. Regret, anger, shame, longing, all of it tangled and unresolved. He grabbed his hat, mounted his horse, and without another word guided the animal toward the tree line. Snow shifted beneath the hooves, scattering a trail behind him. Eleanor watched until he disappeared. Then she let out a breath that weakened her knees. Elias reached for her, steadying her with a touch gentle enough to undo the last threads of fear inside her. "You stood firm," he said softly. "I did," she whispered, "and it hurts less than I thought it would." The wind eased around them, as if the valley itself exhaled with relief. They walked back toward the cabin slowly. Boone pressed against their sides, the ridge behind them now holding only the fading echo of a past that no longer owned her. By the time they reached the trail's bend, the fog had lifted, and for the first time since she arrived at Alder Creek, Eleanor felt truly free. The walk back from the ridge unfolded in long, quiet stretches. Eleanor kept close to Elias, though she did not cling to him. She no longer trembled the way she once had when facing cold or uncertainty. Now she walked with a steadiness that surprised even herself. Each step away from the ridge seemed to loosen another thread she had unknowingly knotted around her heart. The snow softened under their boots as the sun climbed higher. A thin gust of wind brushed past them, lifting the edge of Eleanor's shawl. Boone trotted near her feet, occasionally nudging her knee as if reminding her that she had come through something heavy and was still standing. When they reached the lower part of the trail, Eleanor finally spoke. "I thought it would break me, seeing him again." Elias looked sideways at her. It did not. She let her breath out slower than usual. "No, it didn't. It hurt. But the hurt was honest. Not like before. Before, everything felt tangled, sharp. Today it felt final." Elias nodded once, acknowledging the truth in her words. She walked a few more paces before adding softly, "Thank you for standing with me. I stood beside you," he said gently. "You faced him yourself." Eleanor kept her gaze on the frozen ground ahead. "I could not have done it alone. You did not have to." Silence settled between them again, but it was a warm quiet, touched by relief rather than fear. By the time they reached the clearing, the valley spread beneath a brighter light, reflecting softly off the snow. Smoke rose from the cabin chimney in a thin upward line, steady and sure, just as Elias had left it. Something about that sight stirred a warmth inside Eleanor that had nothing to do with fire. Inside the cabin, the familiar scent of pine and wood smoke wrapped around her as soon as she stepped through the doorway. Eleanor removed her gloves slowly, as if her body needed time to return to this new sense of safety. Elias placed his coat on the peg, studying her from a short distance. She was not the same woman who had walked out with him earlier. Her posture had changed. The weight in her eyes had shifted. "You should rest," he said quietly. Eleanor gave a faint smile. "I am tired, but I do not want to lie down just yet. My mind feels clearer than it has in days." Elias nodded and set water to warm on the stove. She took a seat by the table. Boone settled at her feet, head resting on her boot, his tail brushing the floor in a slow rhythm. After several long moments, Eleanor spoke again. "When he looked at me today, it felt like seeing a ghost of my old self. That version of me would have followed him without question, without asking what I needed, without knowing I deserved anything different." Elias sat opposite her, hands folded loosely. "You were searching for hope. There is no shame in that." She pressed her palms together. "But I was willing to lose myself to hold on to someone who never meant to stay." Elias's eyes softened. "You are not that woman anymore." She lifted her gaze, meeting his steadily. "No, and that is why I could walk away." The room held stillness for a moment, the kind that settles after an emotional storm. Elias poured tea into 2 tin cups and set one in front of her. Eleanor cupped it with both hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "What will he do now?" she asked quietly. "He will go on his way," Elias replied. "Marin always finds another road when one closes, but that is no longer your concern." She nodded, though a small shadow of worry flickered across her expression. He will not return. Will he? Elias held her gaze. If he does, he will find me here. Something in his tone eased the last of her concern. Eleanor looked down at her cup, tracing the rim gently. I do not regret meeting him. Not any more. Without his letters, I would not have known what I was capable of surviving. Without him leaving, I would not have reached this cabin, or met you. Elias paused before responding, his voice low. Life rarely leads us where we expect, but sometimes the harder paths give us what the easier ones never could. She studied his face, the quiet strength in his jaw, the patience in his eyes, the way he carried the weight of others with a steadiness that did not demand recognition. I see that now, she whispered. Afternoon settled, spreading soft golden light across the cabin floorboards. Eleanor rose from the table, drawn toward the window. She looked out at the valley, the west ridge faint in the distance. Elias joined her, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating through his sleeve. Not touching, not pressing, just near. She exhaled slowly. When I first arrived, I felt like a burden, an intruder in a life already shaped without me. But now, I do not feel like I am passing through. You are not, Elias murmured. Eleanor turned to him, voice delicate but strong. What am I then? In this place? In your life? Elias did not answer immediately. He looked at her with a quiet sincerity that carried more depth than any rushed confession. You are someone who belongs here, he said. Not because of what happened to you, not because I brought you in from the storm, but because you fill this place with something it has not had in years. Her throat tightened, but not from fear. And what is that? Warmth. Her breath stilled. Elias did not step closer. He let his words hold all the meaning they carried without pressing for more. Eleanor looked away, blinking slowly as something opened inside her, soft and trembling, blooming like a secret she had been afraid to name. She whispered, I have not felt wanted in a long time. I do not mean claimed or needed, but wanted. The ache in her voice shook something deep in Elias. You are wanted here, Eleanor, but you are free. Free to stay, free to leave. Your choice is your own now. Tears filled her eyes, quiet and warm. I am staying, she said, not because I owe you anything, not because I have nowhere else to go. I am staying because when I wake in the morning, this valley feels like breath I did not know I had been holding. And because when you look at me, I do not feel broken. Elias's breath caught, though he kept his composure. Then stay, he said softly. Evening drifted slowly into the valley. Eleanor began preparing a simple stew, the aroma of herbs and warm broth filling the cabin. Elias chopped wood outside, needing movement to steady the emotions stirring within him. Boone wandered between them, content with the restored peace settling over the place. When dinner was done, Eleanor stepped outside and looked up at the sky. Stars had begun to appear, faint but certain. She heard Elias's footsteps behind her before she saw him. Do you feel lighter now? He asked quietly. Eleanor turned to him, her breath turning to mist between them. Yes, I do. Elias nodded. Tomorrow will be quieter. She smiled a small, grateful smile. Tomorrow will be mine. They stood together beneath the growing night, the cold brushing past them, but unable to reach the warmth building steadily in the fragile new space between their hearts. For the first time since she had stepped off the train into a life she never wanted, Eleanor Grace felt like she had stepped into the beginning of a life she chose. The following morning rose pale and calm, the kind of dawn that seemed to hold its breath. Frost lingered on the ground, but the air had softened overnight, inviting the beginnings of spring to creep quietly across the land. Eleanor stepped outside first, pulling her shawl close as the soft hum of the valley reached her ears. The river whispered beyond the trees. A few distant crows called lazily from their roosts. Her breath made thin clouds in the heart of the early light. Elias followed a moment later, boots crunching through the cold earth. Boone bounded ahead of him, nose pressed to the soil as if tracking something only he could sense. You slept, Elias said gently. Eleanor nodded. I did. For the first time in days, I slept without dreaming of him. Elias studied her with quiet pride, That is a good beginning." She took a slow breath, feeling the truth of those words settle deep within her. They walked to the small barn together. The sky stretched wide above them, painted with soft strokes of sunrise. Inside the barn, the scent of hay and pine wrapped around them. Eleanor gathered kindling while Elias checked the tools along the wall. A breeze drifted in, carrying the faint scent of thawing earth. Eleanor felt it pass over her skin and murmured, "This place, it feels different today." "Different how?" "Like it's opening itself to something new." Elias turned to her, leaning one shoulder against a beam. "Maybe it is." She lowered her eyes for a moment, letting a quiet smile touch her lips. They returned to the cabin after finishing chores. Eleanor began preparing breakfast while Elias chopped wood behind the house. Boone rested beside the hearth, ears twitching as if keeping track of both of them at once. Eleanor hummed softly while stirring the pan, a tune she did not fully recognize. It came from somewhere deep and old, a place inside her that had been locked for too many years. She lifted the pan from the fire just as Elias stepped back inside, bringing the cool scent of morning with him. "Smells good," he said. She handed him a plate without a word. They ate at the small table, sunlight slipping across the floorboards like pale gold. Eleanor watched the steam rise from her cup and felt peace nudge at the edges of her thoughts. After breakfast, Elias returned to the barn to repair a latch on the outer gate. Eleanor cleaned the kitchen, folded blankets, and took careful time arranging the items on the windowsill. The stones. The small wooden bird Elias had carved. A single feather Boone had dragged in the week before. These little things made the cabin feel alive in a way she never expected. She was adjusting the curtain when she heard the sound. A distant clatter, metal on stone, then the unmistakable echo of hooves. Her breath tightened. Boone lifted his head fast. Ears perked. His growl started low, growing sharper as he ran to the door. Eleanor froze, fingers curled around the window frame. "Not again," she whispered. She stepped outside slowly. The sun was brighter now, casting long shadows across the clearing. A rider approached from the south road, dust rising behind him. He was older than Marin, wearing a dark coat and carrying himself with the air of someone accustomed to being obeyed. As he neared, Eleanor saw the authority in his expression, the careful calculation in his eyes. He slowed his horse near the porch. "Morning, ma'am," he called out. Eleanor stood firm, though her heart beat hard against her ribs. "Can I help you?" The man tipped his hat, but his smile never met his eyes. "Name's Samuel Price. Sheriff out of Birch Hollow. I'm looking for a woman traveled west on the last winter run. Folks say she might have passed through these parts." Eleanor's breath thinned. She tried to keep her voice level. "Why are you searching for her?" The sheriff shifted in his saddle. "Seems her family back east raised a fuss. Claimed she disappeared. Thought something unlawful might have happened." Eleanor swallowed hard, trying to keep from trembling. "I am not missing, Sheriff. I am here by my own choosing." Price's gaze narrowed ever so slightly. "And what's your name?" Before she could answer, Elias appeared from around the barn, walking with calm, deliberate steps. His presence settled the air the moment he reached her side. "Her name is Eleanor Grace," he said. "She is here because she wishes to be—" Samuel Price looked Elias over, weighing his words, but said nothing for a moment. Boone took a few steps forward, tail stiff, sensing unease. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Just doing my duty. Got word from a man who said she came out here to meet him. Then she vanished, said it was his right to bring her back home." Eleanor's stomach twisted. "Marin told you that?" Price's eyebrows lifted slightly. "So you know him." She tightened her jaw. "I know enough." Elias stepped between them a little, though not aggressively. "Sheriff, she is free. Free to stay. Free to leave. No one here is holding her against her will." Samuel Price leaned forward in his saddle, studying Eleanor's face. "Do you affirm that?" Her voice wavered only for a second. "I do. I choose to be here." That should have ended the conversation. But the sheriff continued watching her, as if searching for any crack in her composure. After a long beat, he nodded. "All right. I will report that you're safe, that you're not in danger. But if that man decides to press his claim, you may see trouble again." Eleanor's hands gripped the fabric of her shawl. "He has no claim on me." Price sighed. "Men like him don't let go easy." Elias's voice remained calm but firm. "Then they'll have to learn how." The sheriff looked between them one last time, then tugged the reins. "I hope you folks stay safe. Storms don't always come from weather." Elias nodded once. "We know." Price rode off, leaving only dust and the echo of hooves behind him. Eleanor stood motionless until the sound had fully faded. Her breath finally escaped her in a shaky exhale. "He is not done," she whispered. "Marin will not stop." Elias placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You are not alone now. Whatever comes, we will face it together." She leaned into his touch, letting the warmth of his presence anchor her. But inside her chest, something deeper stirred. A small tremor of fear. A question she did not want to speak aloud, but could no longer ignore. What if Marin returned not for love or guilt, but out of anger, out of wounded pride, out of the belief that losing her robbed him of something he thought belonged to him? Elias sensed the worry building in her and gently tilted her chin so she would meet his gaze. "Eleanor," he said softly, "you left that life behind. No man has the right to drag you back, and I will not allow anyone to harm you." She nodded, though her voice trembled. "I believe you," but her hands shook. Elias folded them between his own. "You are stronger than you think," he whispered. "What you faced yesterday would have broken many. Yet here you stand." Eleanor closed her eyes, letting his words settle deep. When she opened them again, her expression had changed. Worry remained, but beneath it lay something steadier, something resolute. "If he returns," she said quietly, "I will not run. I will not hide. I will face whatever shadows he carries." Elias's chest tightened with quiet admiration. "Then you will not face them alone." The wind shifted softly, brushing through the trees, as if acknowledging the vow that had just been spoken. Eleanor looked toward the ridge, where yesterday she had left a piece of her past behind. For the first time since arriving in the valley, she understood that healing was not a single moment. It was a series of small, brave steps, and she was taking another one now. The day after the sheriff's visit unfolded with a strange stillness, as though the land itself waited for something unnamed. The morning light felt softer than usual, almost hesitant as it slipped through the cabin windows. Eleanor woke before Elias, listening to the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. Boone lay curled at the foot of the bed, chest rising like a steady drum. For a moment, she allowed herself to linger there, wrapped in the warmth of their small world. But her thoughts circled back to the sheriff's words and the shadow of Marin that now stretched across the valley. She rose quietly and stepped outside. Frost coated the small patch of grass near the porch, shining like crushed crystal beneath the early sun. Her breath fogged the air. She pulled her shawl tighter, gazing out toward the ridge where the mistakes of yesterday seemed to gather and watch. Elias joined her a few minutes later, hands tucked into his coat pockets. "Cold morning," he murmured. Eleanor nodded. "Feels like something's shifting." He followed her gaze toward the ridge. "Maybe it is, but whatever comes, we will face it side by side." She smiled faintly, though worry still pressed behind her ribs. They went about their chores with practiced rhythm. Elias gathered tools, checking the fence line and clearing fallen branches from the path. Eleanor brought water to the stove and prepared a small pot of coffee. Her movements slow and thoughtful. Boone trailed between them, nose close to the ground, alert to every sound the breeze carried. As the sun rose higher, they walked together toward the riverbank. Elias carried a small bundle of fishing line and wooden stakes while Eleanor held a woven basket for gathering herbs. The path was familiar now, the earth softening beneath the first hints of thaw. The river sparkled in the late morning light, drifting around smooth stones with a gentle murmur. Eleanor crouched near the water, dipping her fingers into the icy current. The cold bit sharply, but she held them there anyway, letting the shock clear her thoughts. Elias watched her quietly, sensing the weight she carried. "You do not have to hold it all alone," he said gently. She turned to him, eyes soft and tired. "I know." But I keep thinking about what the sheriff said, that men like Marin don't let go easily. Elias set aside his fishing line and sat beside her. Fear often lingers longer than it should, but his choices do not dictate your life anymore. Eleanor stared at the river, watching the current pull small leaves downstream. I am afraid of what he will do when he realizes I am no longer someone he can pull by the sleeve. Elias touched her hand lightly, almost reverently. You are stronger than the woman he left behind. He cannot reach who you have become. A deep breath filled her chest. For a brief moment she allowed herself to believe his words. They spent the next hour near the water. Elias set the fishing stakes while Eleanor gathered small sprigs of mint and wild thyme. Boone patrolled the tree line, occasionally stopping to inspect a fallen branch or distant sound. When they headed back, clouds had begun to gather in the western sky. A faint wind pressed through the valley, bending the tops of the pines. Eleanor felt it sweep past her, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of weather preparing to turn. As they approached the cabin, she stopped suddenly. Do you hear that? Elias paused, listening. At first, only the wind answered, then a faint rustle. Boone tensed, ears raised, a low rumble forming in his throat. Elias took Eleanor's arm gently and guided her behind him. Stay close. He stepped forward, eyes narrowed toward the cluster of trees near the north trail. Boone edged beside him, muscles tight, a warning trembling through his body. A moment later, a lone figure stepped from the shadows. Not Marin, not a stranger either. It was Mabel Harrow from the Mercantile, bundled in a heavy coat and scarf, her face flushed from the cold and the long ride. Elias lowered his guard. Boone relaxed. Mabel, Elias said, surprised. What brings you all the way out here? She caught her breath and stepped closer. I came to warn you. Eleanor's heart clenched. About what? Mabel looked between them, worry etched into every line of her face. Marin was in town this morning. Caused a scene at the saloon asking after you. He said he was wronged. Said something about collecting what belonged to him. Folks tried to calm him, but he kept insisting he was coming out here. Before we could stop him, he rode off north. Eleanor felt the ground tilt beneath her. Elias stepped closer, steadying her by instinct. How long ago did he leave? Elias asked. About an hour. Maybe less if he was riding hard. Elias's jaw tightened, though his voice remained level. Thank you, Mabel, truly. Her eyes softened when she looked at Eleanor. You stay strong, dear. Do not let that man twist your heart into fear again. Eleanor's breath shook as she nodded. I will not. Mabel squeezed her hand once before mounting her horse and urging it back toward town. When she disappeared down the trail, silence settled over the clearing again, heavier than before. Eleanor looked at Elias, fear rising like a tide she could not push back. He is coming here. Elias touched her cheek gently. You are safe. I promise you that. But she shook her head, voice trembling. Elias, he is not the same man I knew. Something in him broke long before I left. I could see it even then. He will not speak with reason. He will bring anger, and he will not care who stands in his way. Elias held her close, his voice quiet but unshakable. Let him come. I will stand between you and whatever storm follows him. You are not going back to that life. Boone barked once, as if agreeing. Eleanor clung to Elias's coat, her hands trembling. I do not want to see him. I do not want him here. You will not face him alone. Not now. Not ever. She closed her eyes, breathing in the calm he offered her. When she opened them again, something had shifted inside her. Fear still pulsed beneath her ribs, but another feeling rose beside it, a steadying force, a strength she did not know she possessed. Let him come then, she whispered. If this is the shadow of my past, I will face it, not as who I was, but as who I am now. Elias looked at her as though seeing her anew. Eleanor Grace, he said softly, you are braver than you know. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it the distant cry of a hawk. The air thickened, charged with tension that made even the pines stand taller. Boone barked again, sharper this time. He paced near the edge of the yard, nose pointed toward the north trail. Elias placed a steadying hand on the dog's back, whispering something only Boone seemed to hear. The wind shifted once more, bringing with it the faint echo of hooves far in the distance. The storm had begun to speak, and it was coming straight for them. The wind sharpened as afternoon thinned into evening. Clouds gathered above the valley, sliding low enough to touch the tops of the pines. The air carried a strange stillness, the kind that signaled the world had paused to witness something inevitable. Eleanor stood at the cabin window, palms pressed lightly against the cool glass as she watched the tree line. Boone remained near the porch, pacing in controlled circles, stopping every few seconds to lift his head and test the air. Elias moved quietly through the cabin, checking the door, securing the shutters, steadying himself with every deliberate breath. Eleanor whispered without turning, "He is close. I can feel it." Elias stepped to her side. "So can I." She drew in a slow breath. "Do you think he means to take me back?" Elias looked at her gently. "What he means to do no longer decides anything. Only what you choose matters now." Eleanor touched the small table beside the window, running her fingers across the wooden surface Elias had carved months earlier. The grain felt warm under her skin, grounding her. A distant echo rose, muffled by the thickening wind. A single hoofbeat, then another. Slow, intentional. The sound of a man who did not hide his arrival. Eleanor's breath lodged in her throat. "He is here." Elias straightened, resolve settling over him like an old habit. "Stay behind me. Let me speak first." Eleanor hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I will stand beside you." He turned to her, and what he saw in her eyes made something inside him soften. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't shrinking. She was choosing her place. "Then we stand together," he said quietly. The hoofbeats grew louder, crisp against the frozen ground. Boone moved toward the clearing, posture rigid, ready. At last Marin emerged from the trees, riding a chestnut mare that snorted at the cold air. His coat was dusted with frost. His hat sat low, shadowing a face that looked tighter, harsher than Eleanor remembered. He pulled the horse to a stop a few yards from the porch. For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes swept over the cabin, the yard, the scent of smoke drifting from the chimney. Then his gaze landed on Eleanor. "So it's true," he said, voice low with disbelief. "You came out here. You stayed. You let him keep you." Elias stepped forward, not aggressive, but firmly present. "No one kept her. She chose this place." Marin ignored him. "Eleanor, get your things. You have no idea what you've thrown away." Eleanor felt the old fear stir somewhere deep inside her, the reflex that had been shaped over years of quiet submission. But she did not step back. She did not lower her gaze. She let the silence settle before answering. "I did not throw anything away. Marin, I left behind what hurt me." His jaw snapped tight. "I never hurt you." She looked at him steadily. "You hurt me every time you made me feel small. Every time you spoke about marriage like it was a debt someone owed you. Every time you asked for obedience but not kindness." Marin shifted in the saddle, bristling. "I gave you a future. You gave me chains," she replied softly. The wind gusted across the clearing, lifting strands of her hair. Marin's eyes flicked toward Elias. "And him. Is he your future now?" Elias opened his mouth to speak, but Eleanor raised a hand, quiet yet certain. "This is my choice," she said. "Not his, not yours." Marin's expression darkened. "You made vows? No." She felt her voice steady. "You promised things you did not keep." "I promised nothing. I was sent to you like a package someone ordered, and when you decided you no longer wanted to open it, you left me to the winter." Marin flinched. "I was angry. I needed time. And while you were taking time, I nearly died on a road you sent me down alone." He shook his head sharply, refusing the truth. "You belong with me. You were meant for my home." The last of the old fear broke inside her. "I belong where I am respected, where my voice matters, where silence is not demanded of me, but shared willingly." Elias watched her with quiet awe. Boone stood like a sentinel beside him. Marin stared at her as though seeing a stranger. "So you choose this hunter, this valley, this shack in the woods." Eleanor took a step closer to Elias, but her gaze never left Myron. "I choose peace." The words landed heavy between them. For a moment, the world held still. Myron looked at her, eyes shifting with something raw and wounded. "Eleanor, come back. We can try again." She felt sorrow move through her like a slow river. You cannot rebuild something that never had foundation. Myron's composure cracked. The anger he held flared into something wild. "So that's it. You walk away with him. A man who has nothing but a dog and a pile of chopped wood." Elias spoke then, voice calm but edged with iron. "I have enough to build a life with someone willing to share it. That is more than you ever offered her." Myron snapped his reins. "This isn't over." Eleanor's voice lifted before he could turn the horse. "Yes, it is. You came for an answer, and you have it." She paused, letting the wind catch the truth in her words. "I am not yours. I was never yours." Myron stared at her for a long, brittle moment. Then without another word he turned the mare sharply and rode back toward the trees, disappearing into the thickening dusk. Silence settled over the clearing, deep and final. Eleanor exhaled, knees weakening. Elias stepped close and caught her gently before she could fall. She leaned into him, trembling not with fear now, but with release. "It is done," he whispered. She nodded against his chest. "It is done." The wind softened, brushing across them like a hand offering blessing. The last light of day spilled across the cabin roof. Elias drew back slightly, his hand warm at the small of her back. "Are you all right?" She looked up at him, tears shimmering but calm. "I am free." He cupped her cheek with quiet reverence. "You are." Boone nudged her hand softly, tail wagging with relief. Eleanor laughed through her tears and scratched behind his ears. Elias guided her into the cabin. The fire still glowed in the hearth, casting golden light over the walls. When she settled at the table, he poured her a cup of warm water, adding a few sprigs of thyme she had gathered earlier. She held the cup in both hands, breathing in the fragrant steam. "Elliot." "Yes." "Thank you for standing with me." He touched her shoulder gently. "I would stand with you through any storm." She closed her eyes. I think I am beginning to believe in tomorrow again." His voice softened. "Tomorrow is kinder than the past, and so are you." The room felt fuller than it had that morning, filled with something quiet and strong, a beginning shaped from courage rather than fear. Outside, the night settled over the valley, calm and steady. The danger had passed, and in its wake stood two people who had chosen each other not from desperation, but from understanding. Eleanor looked into the fire, listening to the soft crackle of the logs. "Elias." "Yes." "Eleanor." "May I stay?" "For as long as you wish." She smiled, small and real. "Then I will stay for the rest of my days." He rested his forehead gently against hers, a moment of shared breath and unspoken promise. In the quiet glow of the hearth, their lives began again, and no storm reached them that night. Elias and Eleanor's story reminds us that there are wounds that are invisible to the eyes, but heavier than all the baggage on the road of life. Healing is not about forgetting, but about daring to face, daring to choose what is right for your heart. At any age, people still have the right to start over, the right to find peace for themselves, the right to choose to stand on the side of kindness. The love in this story is not noisy. It grows from silence, from small actions, from the courage to step out of the darkness. It is also a gentle reminder that sometimes a hand extended at the right time can change a person's whole life. Thank you for listening until the end. If the story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to bring you emotional and meaningful journeys like this. See you in the next story.